Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala, thumma amma ba'd. To proceed. So we continue with our discussion about the Diyah of the Muslim woman. We're talking about the Diyah of the Muslim woman and the disagreement over what it is. And in the previous segment, we talked about the issue in the scriptures and tradition, and I tried to be as impartial as I could. And honestly speaking, we all are under pressure to look enlightened or to look orthodox, or to look balanced between enlightenment and orthodoxy. So everybody is under pressure, and you try as much as you can to not succumb to the pressure. There is a very high cost for people to basically say something that they know will displease the majority of their people, that they associate with, they identify with, whether they come from like a more orthodox background and a more enlightened background, or sort of a more or even from that group that is trying to basically strike the balance between enlightenment and orthodoxy. No one is free of pressure. No one does not care at all about what people think of them, and they only have God. Basically, they only have the pleasure of God and the watchfulness of God in their mind. Everybody has sort of that concern about how they'll be perceived, and that is a concern that they have to fight. And maybe they can, and people are in different phases of their recovery from being captive to this concern, being completely sort of enslaved to their concern about how they will be perceived. So you are moving from there, you're hopefully trying to move from there and get to a point where the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only thing in your mind. And keep in mind, some of us have more reasons to be concerned than others. Honestly speaking, for myself, and I'm not trying to look more impartial than others and so on, but for my circumstances, I don't really connect socially with anyone that is of a particular leaning, so that I'm afraid that, if I say this, they'll get upset, and then I'm not going to be able to invite them to maqluba or something, or be invited by them to a maqluba. So that's something that you want. That's an important thing. I believe that it is an important thing. But this is not because I am more impartial than other people or more sincere than other people, because this is how I just handle my life. But again, at the same time, I also have the concern about, how my discussion will be perceived. And oftentimes, you basically step over millions of people to look orthodox and to be perceived as orthodox, and to ignore the feelings and concerns and intellectual contentions of hundreds of millions of people, just to look orthodox. And that's basically rampant among the du'a. And at the same time, the du'a that are committing to enlightenment, they can always sort of dismiss any amount of proofs that will basically make them accept a position that will cause them to look unenlightened. And that is a huge pressure. It depends on which side you pick. And sometimes people pick a side and stay committed to that side, and it is no matter what the discussion is about, no matter what the proofs are, they had already picked, because they picked a side, they had already picked the conclusion, regardless of the premises, regardless of the discussion. That is like an intellectual, a very bad word, but it's intellectual dishonesty, to be polite. So you're trying to deal with the pressures that you have in your mind, but you're trying to also recover from being subject to those pressures all the time, and hopefully you seek the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this would be your ultimate goal. And we are in different phases of treatment and recovery. Some of us may not want, some of us have not diagnosed themselves at all. But like after diagnosis, then you hopefully would be we would be on our way to recovery, which we may be able to reach or not, but that's a different issue. So so we're done with the issue of the discussion in the scriptures and the tradition, and it seems that the issue is subject to discussion, despite the fact that someone like me, with my own hermeneutics, my own Hanbalism, my own hermeneutics, I would be comfortable in the position that the day of the woman is half that of the man. But it is still subject to discussion. Now, the pertinent foundational inquiries, and we said that we will discuss what is moral, right, just, in terms of ethics, and in terms of, and we'll talk about the modern moral philosophy also. So, what is right? What is just? Is it unjust? It is wrong. Is it wrong to say that the day of the woman is half the day of the man?
Morally
yes. Okay. Yeah. No, I'm not. That's fine. You say it's unjust. Okay. Some people may say, we will come to this discussion maybe later, but what about the people who are saying that throughout the history, in terms of sort of financially, throughout the history, up until now, and in most of the world outside of the Western world, where women can have like 8 to 5 jobs, the white-collar jobs, and so on, where they can make as much as men, even though still in the West, they are still behind men. But if we will have to figure out sort of a number to compensate the family for the loss, for their financial loss, not their emotional loss, which cannot be compensated. Keep in mind the Diyah, except in a view that the Shia had, which is to me like very awkward view, that if you want to kill a woman for a, if you want to kill a woman or do a qisas, equal retribution, and kill a man for killing a woman, you will have to pay the family of the man half of the Diyah, because that is the difference. Like if a man killed a woman and the family of the woman wanted to kill the man who killed the woman, according to this position, you will have to pay the family of the man who will be killed half of the Diyah to make up for, because it's not an equal. But that is not a position that we have in the Sunnah, so we don't have to worry about this position, not a position that we have. Okay, so keep in mind, here's one thing that we have to remember. When we talk about the Diyah of the woman, we're talking about financial compensation, not compensation for the emotional loss, of course. In qatl al-amd, in intentional killing, will a woman be killed, will a man be killed for killing a woman? Yes. By consensus, right? Yes. Okay. What about a man being killed for killing a 7-year-old girl? Will a man be killed for killing a 7-year-old girl? Yes. What about 10 men killing a 7-year-old girl? Will they be killed? What about 1,000 men killing a 7-year-old girl? Will they be killed? Yes, by consensus. By I mean, the word consensus itself, but by agreement of Ahl Sunnah, at least. And I may actually say by consensus. That would also be the Shia's position, even though they will say that you'll have to pay whatever. But still, 1,000 men will be killed for killing a 7-year-old girl. So we have to. So this is basically Islam's understanding of the equality of men and women in terms of their humanity and in terms of the equality of blood. The blood of the woman is equal to the blood of the man. Now, when it comes to the Diyah, let us say they will not seek equal retribution, and the family wants the Diyah. The Diyah is a financial compensation. This is not a compensation for the emotional trauma. You can't measure that. You can't put a value on that. Can you put a value on that? No, you can't put a value on that. You can't measure that. This is basically like a rough, because it's a law that has to be for all people, because someone may make sort of billions. Bill Gates used to make $150 per second. From the time he established Microsoft until now, if you measure his sort of not hourly rate, his rate per second, $150 per second. The Diyah is equal to a homeless person in the street. So it is a rough estimate, but it is a form of compensation for financial loss. And if we agree that throughout the history, in all places, in all cultures, men have made more money than women, and we are making now this compensation for the financial loss, not the emotional trauma, nothing, in fact, just financial loss, then it would make sense to say that, yes, that half the may be reasonable. In fact, in their time, where women did not contribute that much financially, some people may say that, financial loss, there was not that much financial loss. Now, we're not talking about the emotional trauma. Keep in mind, like, as a child, had I lost my mom, I would have grieved 10 times more than losing my dad. I lost both. Allah, grant him mercy. But when I was a child, had I lost my mom at the age of, let's say, 10 or 12, I would have grieved a lot more than losing my father. And that, for most normal people here, that is true. So the emotional trauma, certainly, no, we're not putting a value on this. The loss of a mother is more emotionally damaging, but we're not putting a value on human life. And we're not putting the value on the emotional trauma. It's basically only the financial loss. So what is just? What is right? What is moral? Okay, so we have here, and this is mainly Western philosophy now, but that is the Western philosophy. Westerns have dominated the world in the last 500 years, not only militarily or economically, but also culturally and intellectually and so on. So is Western philosophy pertinent? It is pertinent. Are the people in Muslim lands impacted, affected, influenced by Western philosophy? Yes. And it is not all evil. Of course not. And it's not all wrong. Of course not. So a discussion of the Western philosophy is a pertinent discussion, completely pertinent discussion, because that is the dominant philosophy in the world, no matter where you live. If you live in Shabur Markaz Muhammad Hafiz al-Buhaira, that is where my ancestors come from, it is also the dominant philosophy, or the trickle down of that philosophy is the dominant philosophy. So in Western philosophy, from the time of Aristotle and through antiquity, Thomas Aquinas and so on, we had something called virtue ethics. And virtue ethics, basically, the Aristotelian type of virtue ethics is basically to try to reach your potential and have fulfillment, human fulfillment by being virtuous, and the difference between the pre-Socratics and the Socratics, the difference in the Hellenistic tradition between the poetry of Hesiod and Homer, and then the pre-Socratic philosophy, and then the Socratic philosophy. We have clear distinctions between these different phases. So the respect and veneration of beauty and wealth and strength and so on in the early Greek tradition, literary culture of the Greeks was obvious, but then the pre-Socratics started to talk about, other issues, virtue and so on. And then Socrates in particular, then Plato and Aristotle, they had a greater focus on virtue and virtue ethics. And for human fulfillment, you want to reach your potential in virtue, and you want to have ethics to reach your fulfillment. Now, Socrates did not believe in a personal God. Socrates believed in and certainly Socrates was not like the early Greeks who were pagans, but Socrates believed in a deity, a supreme deity that is transcendent, that is remote and detached, and that's not a personal God. So at the end of the day, it is you want to be ethical because you want to be fulfilled as a human being, because that's how to have eudaimonia, good life. So you want to be ethical. So virtue ethics dominated the scene until the modern times. And in the modern times, then we had two different types of ethics. We had consequentialist and categorical ethics. Categorical ethics and consequentialist. This is called deontological, like it is duty-based, deontological, duty-based. This is called teleological. It is purpose-based. It's about the outcome. It's about the result. Deontological, teleological. Categorical ethics, Kant would be the main philosopher that basically defended categorical ethics. Consequential ethics would be the utilitarians. That's Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill and other utilitarians. What is ethical? Ethical here, according to categorical ethics, things have intrinsic or basically there is intrinsic quality in human action that's called right and wrong. Intrinsic, lying is wrong. In the categorical ethics of Kant, lying is always wrong. So someone is hiding in your home, and then like the Nazis come, because we use the word Nazis because that's how. So the Nazis come for them, poor guy hiding, and the Nazis come for them. Kant says you should not lie. You should tell them he's hiding in my home, because lying is wrong. Is that Islamic? No. But is Islam utilitarian? No. Islam has a mixture of both, and Islam can do this. Why? Because we will come later to the issue of the divine lawgiver. Because that is the only way you could justify a fusion between categorical and consequentialist, because you will be able to draw the line. Do you remember our discussion about, the commander and the executor of killing? and how we had this discussion, and if you are under the authority of someone, they commanded you to kill, you still should not kill, and if you kill, you will be killed in all cases, even if you are compelled. But then if you drink wine, that is fine. So all those lines are philosophically cannot be attained by philosophical investigation. You cannot arrive at them. If you want to be completely consistent, you will have to cross those lines. However, because there is a divine lawgiver, even though the scholars disagree among themselves, but there are areas where they don't disagree, because there is a divine lawgiver, then you could have lines. But the major problem here between the consequentialist and the categorical is that there are always examples where you could prove these wrong, and always examples where you could prove these wrong. So the categorical ethicist would say lying is not permissible. Lying is not permissible. If someone was caught planning to detonate a bomb, or someone was caught, he's a member of a fanatic group, and you have intelligence that they are about to detonate a nuclear bomb in the middle of Karachi, and you caught one of them, would you torture him to get information about the bomb and spare millions of people from imminent deaths? If you're Kantian, if you're a categorical ethicist, no. Torture is impermissible. Torture is immoral. Torture is unethical, wrong. That's it, stop, full stop. A utilitarian would certainly say yes, because it is the greater good for the greater number of people. So these two, but this discussion is all about what? And that is what, brilliantly this lady, and in our history there were thousands. Sheikh Akram Nadawi has a book on Muhaddithat, but there were thousands of Muslim women who were scholars, but in philosophy, we've not heard of philosophers except very recently, women philosophers, except very recently in modern times. But one of the brilliant women philosophers or female philosophers of our time is this lady, G.E.M. Anscombe. And she wrote an article called Modern Moral Philosophy. And in this article, she said that all of this discussion, categorical, consequential, it is the ought to ethics. Ought to ethics. It's duty, even though this is the deontological, the duty basically bound ethics, this is purpose-based ethics and so on, they're all ought to. Ought to. You ought to do what is in the best interest of the greatest number of people, that will produce the greatest amount of pleasure and avoid or spare people of the greatest amount of pain, basically. And she said that all of the ought to ethics is completely incoherent. Why? The question is why? You ought to do this, you ought to do that. Why? She said that without a lawgiver, a divine lawgiver that gives you incentives, that motivates you, that basically puts an ontologically real value in the action. Because at the end of the day, so you ought to do this, so what if I don't do it? What was, you know? I mean, if you don't believe in a divine lawgiver, what if I don't? And if we're all dust and if we're all chemical scum on this moderate-sized planet, then what if I don't? So she pointed this out, that all of this discussion is incoherent without a divine lawgiver. All of this ought to ethics is incoherent without a divine lawgiver. And keep in mind that in our countries and in our ummah, for humanity in general, without a divine lawgiver, no matter how much philosophers think that they can replace religion by culture and art and all of this, Nietzsche and stuff, Nietzsche's business, that they can replace religion by these things, it's just not happening and will not happen. So this modern moral philosophy, this is a very influential article, by the way. I'm not talking to you about someone who's like wrote an article from, you know, no, this is an extremely influential article that has been cited in philosophy journals over and over and over again. People have been busy since she wrote this article with this article. Now, she herself was a devout Catholic, but she was also a virtue ethicist. People have urticaria against religion, particularly in Europe. So they interpreted what she said to mean that she was suggesting going back to virtue ethics. Going back to virtue ethics. That ethics should not be ought to ethics, because ought to ethics has to be based in a divine lawgiver. Ethics has to do with fulfillment, not ought to, just fulfillment. If you want to be fulfilled, this is what you do. It is possible that this is what she meant, but being a devout Catholic herself, it is also possible that she was inviting people to reconsider that sort of divorce with religion. But honestly speaking, well, you know, no matter anyone who studied a little bit of philosophy will understand the extreme difficulty in saying the day of the woman being half the day of the man is unjust or wrong, because it is not that straightforward. We have our personal makeup, we have our personal constitution, we have our cultural constitution. There is no judgment, as Kant says, that is independent of your basically perspective. There is no presuppositionless judgment. There is no judgment that is independent, that's just in a vacuum, separated from you. Therefore, it is much more expected of a woman to find this unjust than it is for a man to find it unjust, because it is in part emotive, could be in part rational, but it is in part emotive. And as human beings, it is extremely difficult for us to separate the two. They are fused inside this. You know, our hearts and minds do not, it's not like you can basically turn your mind off, turn your heart on, and switch. No, they are sort of fused, and it is very hard for us to separate the emotive from the rational. So this is an important concept that we need to be aware of, that without a divine lawgiver, it is going to be extremely hard to locate value in any of these morals, or to decide what is moral, what is right, and what is not. Having said that, the next thing that I wanted to talk about is the importance of tasdeeq and taslim. And that is not to silence the opponent or the interlocutor, of course not, and that is why I will discuss interpretation, because oftentimes religious people use the card of tasdeeq and taslim to force the people to submit to them, and to believe them, to believe their interpretation and to submit to it. And that is something that we have to be careful not to do. So tasdeeq and taslim are essential. This is the essence of Iman and Islam. And if that is taken away from us, much will be taken away from us. And as minorities living in the midst of non-Muslim majorities, the subliminal messages that are reaching our subconscious mind are working every single moment of the day to alter sort of our understanding, to change our understanding. Sometimes there are basically positive messages. Amr ibn al-As, what did he say? We live in a basically a Greco-Roman, more than Judeo-Christian, honestly, but a Greco-Roman civilization, a civilization that is based on Greco-Roman tradition more than it is based on Judeo-Christian, although it is based on both, but it is becoming more and more Greco-Roman than Judeo-Christian. And what did Amr ibn al-As say about the Romans? When Mustawrid ibn Shaddad al-Qurashi told him that they will be the sort of the most powerful, أكثر الناس تقوم الساعة والروم أكثر الناس, that they will be, at the end of time, they'll be the sort of most numerous or most powerful, or both, of all the people. And Amr ibn al-As said to him, you heard this from the Prophet ﷺ? He said, yes, I heard it from the Prophet ﷺ. And he said, if you did, then this is why. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And the first one that he said is أحلم الناس عند فتنة, the most forbearing people in the time of fitna, or in the time of chaos and mayhem. They have that forbearance, they can keep it together. And how many times did the Prophet ﷺ tell us? Because he knows that his ummah will be mainly, his deen will be mainly spreading among, warm-blooded nations. So how many times did he tell us, لا تغضب, لا تغضب, لا تغضب? And how much emphasis did he put on forbearance? Hilm. It's a beautiful word. You can't even translate this as forbearance. It just means a lot more. It means integrity. It means composure. It means everything. It means a lot more than forbearance. Is there a better translation for hilm? Yeah. So that's okay. Forbearance, but it's just like a beautiful word. And that is why we lose it all the time. Whenever we discuss anything, you'll find people just, why are you getting angry? If you're working for God, if you perceive yourself as an agent working for God, not by direct commission, because certainly you're not a prophet, but if you're truly working for God, just calm down. He is in control. That does not mean that we will not get angry for God, because that's not what la taghdab means. The Prophet ﷺ used to get angry when hurumat la tuntahak, when people violate the bounds of Allah. But if you look at how he got angry, Abu Mas'ud al-Ansari says a man came to the Prophet, and I'm going on a tangent here. I should go back. But Abu Mas'ud al-Ansari said to the Prophet, said that I saw a man came to the Prophet ﷺ, and he said to him, إني لا أتأخر عن صلاة الغداء لما يطول فلان فيها. I come late to the morning prayer because fulan, X person, makes a very long prayer or lengthens it too much. And then Abu Mas'ud al-Ansari said what? فما رأيت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. And that's a great companion. So he said, فما رأيت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أشد غضبا منه في موعظة منه يومئذ. فما رأيت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أشد غضبا في موعظة منه يومئذ. I have not seen the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم more angry in giving advice or in exhortation than he was on that day. And he said, أيها الناس, look at the process, and I'm getting too angry now. So, أيها الناس إن منكم منفرين من صلى بالناس فليخفف فإن منهم الكبير فإن منهم المريض والكبير وذا الحاج أو كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم. So, O people, some of you are scaring people away from faith. Scaring people, منفرين, you repel, you scare people away from faith. Whoever leads the people in prayer, let him make it light, خفف, light, because some of them are sick, some are old, and some have urgent needs to take care of. And then he said, أيها الناس. He didn't even address the person that was doing this, and he didn't even mention the name of her. So anyway, Hilm is great. So, but I'm going back, I'm going on a tangent here. But going back, there are subliminal messages that we are receiving all the time. So the issue of tasdeeq and taslim will become harder for us. And that is an issue, a major issue. That is a threat. People are, getting worked up over, who's growing their beard and who's like, who's putting his hand where and salah and this stuff. But we are threatened by a lot more than this. The issue of tasdeeq and taslim, particularly for Muslim minorities who live in cultures that are worldwide dominant and superior militarily, superior economically, superior intellectually, superior in many, many regards, they will be affected. They will be affected. And this particular ayah is an ayah that we need. If we're not comfortable with this ayah, we have to make ourselves comfortable. And actually, Sheikh Muhammad Shinawi is here, so I sent him a message because I was thinking about this ayah yesterday. I sent him a message yesterday to ask him, when is the book coming out about the prophethood, the proofs on the prophethood of the Prophet ﷺ? Because it is extremely important for us to come to terms with this ayah. وَتَمَّتْ كَلِمَةُ رَبِّكَ صِدْقًا وَعَدْلًا لَا مُبَدِّلَ لِكَلِمَاتِهِ وهو السميع العليم. Okay, the word of your Lord has been fulfilled, or your Lord, the word of your Lord has been fulfilled in truth and in justice. There is no altering for his word, and he is the all-hearing, the all-knowing. The word of your Lord has been fulfilled in truth and justice. Because the word of your Lord is two parts, the declarative and the imperative, the descriptive and the prescriptive. So with regard to the descriptive, sidqan, in truth. With regard to the prescriptive, adlan, just. So everything Allah tells us about the universe, about truth, about reality, is true, and everything Allah prescribes for us is just and fair. We have to come to terms with this, we have to hold on to this, and we have to embrace this, and we have to die with it. Having said that, there is also another beautiful verse in Surah Al-Zumar. This is in Surah Al-An'am, but there is also another beautiful verses in Surah Al-Zumar where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَمَنْ أَظْلَمُ مِمَّنْ كَذَّبَ عَلَى اللَّهِ وَكَذَّبَ بِالصِّدْقِ إِذْ جَاءَ أَلَيْسَ فِي جَهَنَّمَ مَثْوًى لِلْكَافِرِينَ وَالَّذِي جَاءَ بِالصِّدْقِ وَصَدَّقَ بِهِ أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُتَّقُونَ لَهُم مَّا يَشَاءُونَ عِندَ رَبِّهِمْ ذَلِكَ جَزَاءُ الْمُحْسِنِينَ وَالَّذِي جَاءَ بِالصِّدْقِ, and he who brought forth the truth, and he who believed it, وَصَدَّقَ بِهِ إِذْ جَاءَ, once it came to him, once it came to him. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq always, once it came to him, believed it. أولئك هم المتقون. Those are the righteous. Those are the pious. لهم ما يشاءون عند ربهم. There will be for them whatever they desire with their Lord. ذلك جزاء المحسنين. That's the reward of the good doers. So taslim and tasdeeq is important, and let it not be stolen from our hearts. Let them not be stolen from our hearts. Islam's distinction is another important issue that I wanted to talk about. And I understand that I will be over time. And I beg you, if you have anything to run to I can't basically stop somewhere and defer the rest for another week. I'm just going to carry on until I am done. Please, if you have arrangements or prior engagements, leave whenever you want and listen to the rest on Facebook. So Islam's distinction is something. When I started this talk, I talked about Voltaire and Newton. There are a lot of people that really had, intellectual vigor, moral courage, and honesty among the philosophers and the great intellectuals of the last couple hundred years. And they just had like a very difficult time accepting the preaching of the church or accepting certain Christian doctrines. You have Tolstoy, for instance. Tolstoy is a very, very honorable man. Very, very honorable man. Very, very honorable man. To give all of your positions to the poor and to live a life of sort of moderation, you must believe in what you're preaching. You must be. That's what Tolstoy did. He inherited a great estate, and he basically divided it between his workers. So we're talking about very brilliant people that were very honorable as well, that could not come to terms with the teachings that they were receiving in the church. And I can go on and on and on and about those examples. There are endless examples. But should we have the same difficulty with Islam? Should we have the same difficulty with Islam? And some of the teachings in Islam that, because of personal and cultural, our personal and cultural constitution, may cause us some discomfort at some level, emotional or intellectual. I don't think so, because of many reasons. If you look at the history of Christianity, and if you look at how it came together and how it became a religion, there were early Christians who believed that there is one God. There were early Christians that believed that there were two. There were early Christians that believed that there were three. There were early Christians that believed that there were 30. There were early Christians that believed that there were 365 gods. And they were all calling themselves Christians. There were, the canon was canonized after hundreds of years. You say it yourself. There were early Christians who believed that Jesus died, but not died for our salvation. There were early Christians who believed that Jesus died for our salvation. There were early Christians that believed that Jesus did not die. There were early Christians that believed that Jesus was a man, completely a man, a Jewish man. If you read Mark, that's what Mark says. There were early Christians that believed that Jesus was divine. John says that. There were early Christians that believed that the law should not be followed. That's what Paul says. There were early Christians that believed that the law should be followed. That's what Matthew says. There were early Christians that believed that the universe was created by a malicious God, other than the true God, other than the Father. And they were calling themselves Christians. There were Gospels that you cannot count. They were canonized after hundreds of years by the church. That history of Christianity Is it in any way similar to the history of Islam in that sense? The historicity-wise, is it similar to the history of Islam? No, it is not. If you look at the Quran, if you look at the uniformity of the Quran, if you look at the transmission of the Quran, is this like this? No. So when people have doubt about Christianity, yes, well, that, which Christianity are you talking about? There were tons of Christianities, and some prevailed over others because of political reasons. Is that comparable to the history of Islam? No, but we will come to the issue of basically the tradition, and this is another discussion that we will touch on. And now, when it comes to Islam, what are the things that are making us uncomfortable? Do they have to do anything with the God himself? The disagreements between us, there are Christians up until today that believe that God is a big man in the sky. And there are Christians that believe that God is ineffable. You can't even describe him, that believe in an impersonal God, and they call themselves Christian. And the distance between those who believe that he's a big man in the sky who has emotions comparable to ours, and those who believe that there is basically no God, but is an impersonal sort of being, force, they're all Christians. But is the distance between us Muslims when it comes to our understanding of God ever that vast and wide? No. And in every regard, so we have the Quran, we have the Prophet ﷺ. Christians, because Jesus, peace be upon him, is considered to be God, they have apostles. Those apostles did not actually need to prove anything to anyone. They were writing books saying that this is from God. Tons of apostles were writing books saying that this is from God. Came after Jesus by 100 years, writing books saying that this is from God. They did not need to basically prove anything by any miracles or anything. It's just like unknown people. If you look at the authors of the different books in the New Testament, unknown. Can you imagine? Do you see the difference? Huge differences. And what are the things that are causing us discomfort? We believe in one God that created this universe, the God of Adam, Noah, Ibrahim, Musa, Isa, and Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, the God that has the most perfect and most beautiful names and attributes. And that's in control of all things. The basic beliefs should be should be enough for us to have so much certainty and so much comfort and so much inner peace, and just embrace that basic belief, and then approach the Quran with the taslim and the tasdeeq and the taslim, all that we can basically invoke of tasdeeq and taslim. And when it comes to the tradition, because most of the time, when Muslims disagree, they are not disagreeing with God. And they have complete comfort in their Islam, maybe a lot more than zealots who may become apostates one day. A lot of zealots became apostates. And some of those Muslims that are critical, they had solid belief all the way until death. So they are questioning the tradition. So when it comes to the tradition, and I'm going somewhere like back and forth between these because I'm trying to mix everything now. When it comes to the tradition, we have to understand that our tradition is not all over the place like in other religions, and there was no conspiracy, and the vast majority of our scholars were great, good, well-meaning people, people. You have to approach the tradition, with a loving, respectful, but critical, loving and respectful yet critical attitude. Critical in the sense that there is no one ma'soom after the Prophet ﷺ. And yes, if you want to disagree with the four Imams, certainly, you know, you want to be a mujtahid to disagree at an intellectual level. But if you find comfort in your heart against towards a position that is agreed upon by the four Imams, you're not finding discomfort. Did I say comfort or discomfort? You're not finding discomfort in your heart towards God. And anyone, any da'i that tries to make people think this way is a criminal. Just a straightforward criminal. If you're finding discomfort in your heart against a position that is advanced by the four Imams, you're not finding discomfort in your heart towards God. They are different. But again, at the same time, it is unlikely and very unlikely, and Imam Ibn Taymiyyah is one with enormous, and you know my love for him, enormous moral courage and intellectual vigor and dishonesty, like on the cutting edge of all of the above. Moral courage, he was in prison five times, he died in prison. He fought in the battle, in different battles, intellectual and real ones, and intellectual dishonesty. He never shied away from saying the truth, but he himself said that if someone says that I will not take, he said two things. If you say that I will not take from the four Imams, meaning I'm not taking from one of them, then you're fine. But if you think I'm not going to take from any one of them, you will be most likely wrong. And he said that the agreement of the four Imams is most of the time right and rarely could be wrong. Rarely could be wrong. That is what I believe wholeheartedly, not because of my love for him, but what I believe wholeheartedly. And that is the position of all the people, whether they are pro Ibn Taymiyyah or against Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah. That's the belief of the vast majority of rational, reasonable scholars who are still committed to the scriptures and the tradition, that the agreement of the four Imams is most likely right, but not always right. Not always right. There could be a few issues here and there where the agreement of the four Imams is not correct. So that is the issue of the tradition and interpretation. Our tradition really has been superb in terms of the honesty, in terms of the commitment to the scriptures, in terms of the commitment to the first community, but not infallible. And there were many mistakes, and sometimes the mistakes were also a product of their culture. And that is important because now we will talk about the temporality or tarikhiyat al-nas, or the temporality of the text. And that is something that is being propagated in Muslim countries nowadays, and many people believe in this. Many intellectuals believe in this. I, lived a good portion of my life, and I went back, and I'm still connected to a lot of people in Muslim countries. Many people believe in tarikhiyat al-nas, and certainly the most common, the most famous proponent of tarikhiyat al-nas is Nasr Hamid Abu Zayd. Nasr Hamid Abu Zayd. He became the most famous because the Azhar denied him his doctorate, and because people, basically separated between him, the court in Egypt separated between him and his wife because of apostasy. And yes, the court in Egypt still can do things like that. So and then he became a very, very famous person, particularly, because the idea of the temporality of the text, this is for the intellectuals outside of the Muslim world, and inside the Muslim world, it's a very appealing idea, because that will allow Muslims to stay Muslim and at the same time not have to worry about the scriptures and whatever the scriptures tell us, because all of it is basically restrained now within a time period and also a particular location. And this idea of the tarikhiyat al-nas, or the temporality of the text, has a lot to do with basically the dialectic between the infrastructure and the superstructure. And most of the people who believe in Tariqiyat al-Nas are people that have Marxist leanings. And the dialectic between the infrastructure and the superstructure is a Marxist idea. So the infrastructure basically is, money, labor, distribution, and all of these, the economic factors at the bottom. And the superstructure is religion and politics and philosophy, culture, all of that stuff at the top. And the dialectic between the infrastructure and the superstructure is basically a dialectic of cause and effect. Cause and effect. Both of them are cause and effect. But from a Marxist viewpoint, which one is more dominant, more important? Which one dictates, is behind the steering wheel? Of course, the infrastructure is behind the steering wheel in this. So people who talk about Tariqiyat al-Nas, they're coming from that paradigm to say that the Quran was produced in response to factors like mainly economical factors, socio-economical factors in Arabia during that time. And that is, and it is funny how there is a spectrum and how many different people can find themselves or can claim to be Muslim or can think of themselves as Muslim and continue to propagate these ideas. Because after all, the prophet, how people understand the word prophet is very different. But at the end of the day, these people are particularly at that level, and it's many of them, and it's a large number of them, particularly at that level, are really saying there is no divine communication. There is nothing, that idea of the Quran being sent by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through Jibreel to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that whole thing is just, this is for the masses, this is for people who are intellectually sort of not there to appease them. But at the end of the day, the prophets have greater sensitivity to the realities around them. Those who have basically sort of kind understanding of prophethood in the prophets, these are people who are brilliant, and they had greater sensitivity and greater qualities and greater mental capacities. And then in response to the reality, they produced these scriptures, or they produced this message. And then this, but some of them also would say, there is a clear divine communication from the divine. The people who say this, they can still call themselves Muslims because they say to themselves that this is the divine working within the prophets. The divine working within the prophets. So, but some of them say there is a message, coming from the divine to the prophets, but this message is still in response, and this message is largely tailored for the circumstances of that area in that time, and that's it. That's it. And how do we now distinguish between this and the concept of تغير الفتوى بتغير الأزمنة والأمكنة والأحوال والنيات والعوائد that is not agreed on? These words are always problematic, but that is accepted by mainstream Muslim scholars, that the fatwa would change. The fatwa would change. I would because we don't have a lot of time, and I wanted to say that the difference here is basically sound hermeneutics, using sound hermeneutics. The people who are saying that the fatwa changes are people that are Muslim fuqaha, the mainstream Muslim fuqaha. They're saying that the fatwa changes. They're saying that the divine message came with rulings, and those rulings are often attached to ilal mundabita, to measurable causes, and the fuqaha are looking, the fuqaha are not blinded by the details from basically finding those measurable causes of the rulings, and whenever the change in circumstances or circumstantial variables make those effective causes shift because of the changes in time and place, and one ruling then becomes more befitting of this effective cause of this illah than the other. And that is a process. Tahqiq al-manat is a process ascertaining the presence of those effective causes in the particular circumstance or reality is a process that is done by the fuqaha. So it is basically surgical. It is not a wholesale, times have changed. No, this is a surgical process that the fuqaha and the most distinguished of the fuqaha should always embark on and should not shy away from. Why? Because if they don't, we will have this, and it will prevail. If the fuqaha fail to work within that paradigm and address the changes in the reality by adhering to our sound hermeneutics and using the scriptures and our sound hermeneutics to address the huge changes in the reality, we will end up with this paradigm prevailing, and people will be talking about the temporality of the text, and you will have a very different Islam. And it happened to Christianity, and it happened before, so don't think it's impossible. It may happen. So back to the Diyah of the woman. Now, individually, what do we do, and collectively, what do we do? Well, I think that, yes?
Can you just make a disclaimer, if you don't mind, just because we're recording, about what you mean by that it could happen to Islam? Do you mean that all of Islam would be...
No, what I mean by it can happen to Islam is that it can happen to Islam as a practice, as the practice of the Muslims. Islam itself will be protected. But again, at the same time, we are concerned about the Islam that is being practiced by the Muslims all over the place. That is not being protected by a divine decree. And we have seen Muslims go up and down in their practice of Islam. So Islam is a practiced phenomenon, extant practiced phenomenon, versus Islam as the divine, the last communication from the divine, which will continue to be protected. But then, individually, what do we do in this case? And collectively, what do we do? And I think individually, individually, there are differences. We have to agree. And I hope that I was impartial enough in this discussion that I'm not denying the people their feelings, their entitlement to their feelings. And individually, we have to agree also that we may not have the same perspective and we may not have the same understanding. And if you are having a difficulty, research the issue. Research, and try to find the good answers. Come to the issue with complete taslim and tasdeeq of the divine message, a loving, respectful, yet critical approach to the tradition. These are two important. Complete taslim and tasdeeq to the divine message, loving, respectful, yet critical attitude towards the tradition, and then research. And then classify. Where does it belong? Where does it belong? Do you believe it's a matter of consensus? It's a matter where the divine message is clear on the issue? Please submit. Accept. Submit. Sami'na wa ata'na. We listen and we obey. Otherwise, your iman will be taken away from you. You will go to sleep, you wake up, you have nothing. So if you believe that this is an issue that is basically where there is no certainty, continue research. Meanwhile, If you decided to believe in a position that is eccentric position, but you believe it is the right position, you believe that this would be the divine, basically, position, or the divine intent of the legislation, that's fine. That does not take away your iman, if you're comfortable about this. But you have to be honest with yourself. You have to be honest. If you're truly comfortable about it, you have to be honest. Collectively, what do we do, particularly if we're talking about not at the level of sort of intellectual discussion or, but the level of legislation and practical and legal issues, and that is the never-ending conflict in the Muslim countries in modern times between people, different strands who have different beliefs and different sort of thoughts about, the relationship of Islam and politics, or Islam and the law, and Islam's position in the public sphere. Islam's position in the public sphere. Where is Islam's position in the public sphere? And honestly speaking, in order for us to, did I talk to you about the divine lawgiver? The idea that morality can be basically found and propagated, among the masses outside of the divine law is an idea that is basically weak. Let's say, be respectful. That's weak. It's so we have to agree that Islam will always have a place in the public space in Muslim countries, and we have to agree that we cannot prevent people from being informed by their beliefs. But in order for us, because we have, when it comes to the political philosophy, we have contractarianism, and then we have the divine lawgiver, and then we have contractarianism. Contractarianism is basically where right and wrong is based on our agreement. We agree, we come into this, we move into civilization from the wilderness, and we agree that we will follow the rules of the game, and we have a parliament, and we, whatever the parliament decides, then that is what is going to be right. Because it's a contract. It's the contract between us. And if we don't agree on a contract, so where does Islam fall between the two? Is Islam with the divine lawgiver idea or contractarianism? And again, because Islam is not, it is difficult for Islam to squeeze it anywhere. Islam is both. There are elements of both. And in this case, why? Because Islam is not a Islam is not a theocracy. Islam is not divine. What do you mean by a divine law? Because, do you remember when we talked about the executor and the compeller and the disagreement among the four mazahib? There are different interpretations. And some of these interpretations may be called eccentric, but they are there. And you cannot say that this is the divine law as if you are speaking on behalf of God. There is certainly an area, of clarity, but that area of clarity is limited compared to all of, the disagreement. And the answer is contractarianism when it comes to the wide spectrum of disagreement. Contractarianism, we agree there is a parliament and the law will be decided there. Now, the parliamentarians are Muslim. Some parliamentarians may not be. In a Muslim country, some parliamentarians may not be Muslim. But if we're talking about a Muslim majority country, the majority of the parliament, the people in the parliament, members of the parliament, will be Muslim. Islam will inform their decisions and their policy making and their choices. And that would be the way out of the perpetual conflict that will result in civil unrest, endless civil unrest, endless civil strife. So in a matter of this, like Diyah al-Mar'a, you could continue to lobby members of the parliament. I mean, we're imagining a different world here. So, we're talking about, like, if you were in Egypt, for instance, one day, inshallah, when but then you have members of the parliament, and then you have this deep conviction that the Diyah of the woman should be equal to the Diyah of the man. It's not you, Sheikh al-Qaradawi, Sheikh Muhammad al-Ghazali, Sheikh Muhammad Abu Zahra, Sheikh Mahmoud Shaltut. They should lobby members of the parliament to make the Diyah of the woman equal to the Diyah of the man. And that's it. And if you believe, like the rest or the majority of the fuqaha, that it is half, you should lobby the members of the parliament. قولوا قولي هذا استغفر الله لي ولكم سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك اشهد ان لا اله الا انت استغفرك واتوب اليك